All right, so in addition to church, in addition to weekday kind of what things look like, I think we should talk about the Sabbath. So Adventist Sabbath is a little different from Jewish Sabbath. Now, it's the same time periods overall, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. I know some Jewish synagogues or congregations that keep earlier than the sundown time and then later than the Saturday sundown time, just to make sure that they're not infringing on the actual Sabbath time. Like, you're expected to be kind of like already there and well into it before the time. Sabbath traditions, a lot of times now, I can tell you the traditions I grew up with. And I'm telling you, like, at home, we didn't always do this stuff without fail every week, every day. But it was just part of my lifestyle, as in kind of what I did growing up, like from childhood, pretty much from age 5 or so till like college, maybe like during up till maybe my second year of grad school. I was pretty involved in church probably up until then. So Sabbath starts Friday sundown, ends Saturday sundown. I've mentioned before, but it's because of, the Jewish tradition that God, from creation. So it comes from creation. That's where the Sabbath comes from. That the first Sabbath was created by God on the seventh day. So he created the earth and universe in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. And the reason why it's evening to morning, Friday sundown, starting Friday sundown, is because the Jewish traditionally start their days evening to morning. So instead of saying Saturday all day from, midnight on Saturday till almost midnight on Sunday, early morning Sunday, it's celebrated. We say celebrate the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath, celebrating the Sabbath. Friday night to Sunday. Friday night to Saturday night. And the reasoning behind it being that, if you read the creation story in the very beginning of Genesis, it talks about, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is like the very beginning of the Bible, where it talks about God creating light first, saying, let there be light, and separated the darkness from the light. And eventually it says there was evening and there was morning. That was the first day. And so that's mainly why Jewish people have their days starting evening to morning. So evening was the start of the first day, and then morning was the end of the first day. Then when it became sundown again, that was now day 2. So yes, evening and morning. And the Sabbath being the 7th day, Friday night to Sunday. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying Sunday. It's because I'm tired. It's Friday night to Saturday sundown. And it's always sundown to sundown. Now, I've mentioned before, but this changes. Sundowns change. Tonight, I think sundown was 4:47. Am I wrong? Let me see. December 17th of 2021. December 17th of 2021. Well, tomorrow's sunrise is going to be 6:45 a.m. Tomorrow's sunset is 4:45 p.m. I don't know if tonight's was that exact same time. But yeah. So around 4:45 p.m. it was tonight as well. Somewhere I thought I saw 4:47, but I wasn't like fully paying attention. Let's see. Yeah, maybe it was 4:45, but I thought I saw 4:47. I don't know. Maybe that was another day this week. But yeah. So 4:45 p.m. ish. That's when Sabbath started. Usually Adventists know the exact start and stop times. Especially because like you're kind of planning your whole week around it. Like especially when you're in your teens and you're going out with your friends and stuff, if you have freedom where your parents let you go do stuff with your friends and go to the mall and go to movie theaters and stuff, you need to know like when is it okay for you to like leave. Or if your family does like a devotional or some kind of nighttime closing the Sabbath. So a lot of times if the church doesn't have a Vespers, so what a Vespers is like a not so traditional service. So there's usually praying, there's usually music, there might be some sort of like eating, fellowshipping, kind of socializing time. A lot of it, you know, for Adventists, a lot of times like in the summers we would do beach Vespers, which is usually you would eat veggie hot dogs or get there early and you go swim at the beach and do veggie hot dogs. And then as the sun was setting, at sundown, we would sing some music and do some praying, and there'd be like a bonfire while we were doing all that. And then people would help clean up and put the stuff in the pastor's van or clean up and, you know, take some extra food home or whatever, and then wake up in the morning and go to church. So we would do that. Not all churches have Vespers. Some do, some don't. I think our church didn't do it every week. I know we did beach Vespers, but I know in high school and college we had like a collegiate kind of Friday night Vespers. We used to have something called Teen Rap that later on became something else on Friday nights, but it was still the same general idea of like a Bible study and just kind of like, I don't know if we had like a meal every time. I think we had like maybe snacks like chips or whatever, sodas maybe. And a lot of times the kids would go out and like skate. So sometimes it would be at the youth pastor's house, sometimes it would be at the church. And skating would be popular afterwards and before, but I don't think it was popular to actually play like competitive sports. So we didn't really do a lot of like basketball, soccer, baseball, football. Like we would kind of get away with it sometimes. We try to get away with it after church potluck sometimes. We would go out on one of the fields. Like I think all the churches we went to kind of had like a space where you could use it as like a field, or like the parking lot would have like a basketball court or whatever. And then we would try to play sports, and then, you know, the pastor or the youth pastor or somebody's parent would always come out and eventually tell us to stop. But, you know, we'd always disappear for a little bit and go play sports. And it was kind of ideal because a lot of us, I don't know if it's like that now, but I mean, when I grew up, a lot of Adventists were pretty athletic, oftentimes because you couldn't really do anything. Like even during the week, there were a lot of things you weren't really allowed to really be doing. Like I have friends that didn't really go to movies or watch movies. They were allowed to play sports and stuff, but they weren't really allowed to do like a lot of other stuff. So it's like, and because there's a lot of kids your own age, you know each other, you see each other maybe at school, you see each other during the weekends. And so because you know one another pretty well, it's not uncommon to want to play sports, because it's like, well, there's nothing else to do. Like, what else are we supposed to do? There's nothing else to do. Like, we can't go to the movies. We can't go watch a sports game. We can't go to a concert. We can't go do anything. So, a lot of times you're together and you just, okay, well, why don't we just play sports? Like, we're here. We usually had enough people for like 2 teams. So that was kind of something we weren't really allowed to do, but we would, maybe go to the beach, maybe hike. Couldn't really swim at the beach. Most of my friends couldn't, but we would just sit there with blankets sometimes, or just like walk and, or go over to each other's houses and just like sit around and like talk or whatever, go in the backyard. And I don't know. It was kind of hard when you're like a teen, because you wanted space from like your parents. It was kind of hard to have like privacy and like space, because like, it's like, well, I can't really talk to my friends if my parents are like in the living room and we're in the kitchen. So it's kind of like, sometimes it would be a little more fun to go to like your friends' houses, even if they weren't allowed to do stuff. It was like, at least I'm not around my parents. So a lot of times, like, people didn't really want to be home with their own parents. So we would go to like other people's houses a lot. That would be a common thing. I've described the church services, but there's a lot of time when you're not in church. Church is generally, if you think about Sabbath school to like the end of church, usually church would be 9 to 12:30. Some churches might start a little earlier. Some churches do Sabbath school at the end. Some churches go really long to like 1 something, but they typically end around lunchtime or before lunch, because you gotta eat lunch. I don't know of any churches that really go straight through lunch. I know of churches that start later. So 3 to 5 was a church that I used to go to. And it started out as like a collegiate ministry, kind of after church kind of service for collegiate age people. And so we would go there, but they didn't want it to interfere with the other churches. So they didn't want people to stop going to church. They were like, well, we want you guys to still go to your main church, but you can go to this one after, because this one's for you, kind of built for you. Because at that time, there was an epidemic of like people leaving the church. It's like after high school age, there's really nothing for people in college. It's either like you join people that are like your parents' age, and they have these like marriage groups that are really like intimate marriage conversations, where sometimes they'll kick you out of the room because you're not like really part of the group, because they're not married. They'd have like a women's ministry, and they're usually older women. They'd have like a men's ministry for like single men. They're usually older single bachelors. They'd have like different groups that were maybe different language groups. Or they'd have like traditional groups for people who wanted like a more traditional thing, or groups where people studied the quarterly, or groups where people studied like different types of topics. But they never really have groups for people that were like between the ages of 18 until whatever age where you got married. You're kind of like left out of the church. Not really left out, but like, unless you were like volunteering a lot, because a lot of people that age are usually at an Adventist university, living on the campus away from their home church, or they're like doing mission work or something like that. So I think traditionally, because those were usually the two like groups of people traditionally in Adventism within like your 20s or so. Usually that's what you would be doing, either college or mission work. They didn't really make it so that traditionally there was like a lot of space in the church for Adventist people in their 20s. It's like either you're hanging out with a bunch of teenagers, or you're hanging out with people your parents' age, or people a little younger than your parents, but they're kind of like the bachelors that weren't quite married, or married couples. And it's like when you're 18, 19, 20, 23, you don't want to be hanging out with like couples in like their mid 40s or whatever with like their babies and stuff. Like, like you might have a couple friends like that or whatever, but it's like you kind of want to hang out with your whole cohort too. And a lot of them, if what started happening in my age range is that a lot of people didn't send their kids to the super expensive Adventist schools. They started sending their kids to the public schools, public high schools, public colleges, transferring in the universities. And so there were a lot of people that were local that were still members of the church that were teens, and then growing older to 18, 19, 20s, to their late 20s. We were still like in college and then starting in the workforce and are going to grad school and stuff like that. And there was like no place for us whatsoever. So it's kind of like they kind of had to make like a collegiate kind of age range of people. So we did that age range. And it was like, let me see. So we did, we were, so the Sabbath, basically, if you didn't do a Friday night thing, you were maybe at home, who knows what you're doing. Traditionally, electronics, I can't say electronics aren't being used. So nowadays, I don't really know what people do on the Sabbath, because I don't know of any people who actually follow, like, not going on YouTube or not going on Facebook or not going on Instagram or like no social media whatsoever. Like, I grew up in an age where it was mostly young people on MySpace and then college students on Facebook. It didn't start, adults that were out of universities didn't start being more involved on Facebook, like my parents' age and stuff. They weren't on Facebook when I was first on there, and I got on there late, like probably in like, I don't know, 2008 or something like that. I got in there late. There were already people who were like, you don't have Facebook? Like, what's up with you? So I didn't, but yeah, I remember even during that time period, you could still maybe not really use social media because like Facebook was like the only thing. And like I mentioned before that, there was MySpace. So there was Facebook, there was MySpace, there was maybe people on YouTube, watching YouTube. And then there was like the church, as far as like the lessons that people would kind of be involved with. So there was usually, that was mostly all there really was. That's mostly all there really was. But yeah, when I was younger, it was like people didn't, they would Sabbath, Friday sundown, you turn off your TV, you stop listening to secular radio. Now you might have TV on, you might have radio on if it was like religious programming, or like some kind of DVDs or cassette tapes or CDs or whatever you had that was already like religious. But it wasn't everything. Yeah, and then that's why a lot of times people would spend time at like Vespers or time at church and volunteering and stuff, because it's like, well, if there's nothing else to do, how else are you going to spend your day? So that was kind of traditionally what people would do. So that was like Friday, Saturday. Yeah, Saturday would be church most of the morning to the afternoon. Afternoon was kind of like, who knows if you're gonna like stay at church or not. Depending on your service, or maybe you go to a different church that had another type of service going on, and you're basically trying to do something different than what you would do during the week. You're usually not going to be working. You're usually not going to be studying. You're usually not going to be in classes. You're usually not going to be doing overtime. You're usually not going to be buying or selling anything, or fundraising or anything. But you could do a lot of volunteer stuff, a lot of community service stuff, a lot of like nature walks, being in nature, a lot of different sorts of things, just to reconnect you with things that aren't, I don't want to say worldly or secular, like it's bad, but things that aren't just like the daily mundane hustle and bustle of life. You just kind of turn off from everything. I mean, I love the Sabbath. I like doing podcast recordings. Sometimes I get into like the Jewish Parsha study, the daily portions, and then, do the study like for whatever the Sabbath portion is. And I'm not very good at it, but like I wouldn't consider myself really like a religious person. I was at one point in my life. I'm not anymore. And I'm fine with that. But I do value a lot of things. I do value the Sabbath. I like it personally just because it forces me to get a break, and I do kind of feel a bit attached to it in a way that's like, it is odd for me if it's like Saturday and I'm like doing work. I mean, I think up until grad school, I don't think I ever studied on the Sabbath up until maybe like, I don't even think in my master's program that I studied on the Sabbath from what I recall. Maybe I did if we had like study groups or something, but I really don't remember doing it then. Now I didn't finish my PhD program, but I believe that I that it was during that time period with the PhD program that I started, doing homework and like studying and stuff on the Sabbath. And I did notice a drastic change in my health, in my lifestyle balance, in my energy levels. Like I remember literally going to church, and then like I mentioned, there used to be that collegiate service that kind of eventually turned into like a full church of its own. So I would go to that 3 to 5 service, and then I would leave, like this time of year when sundown was 4:45 p.m. or so. I would leave. I don't remember if I left early before the service was over, but it ended at like 5, and I would just go straight home after and study. And then, so I would study, I would study after Sabbath. But during, and I would still go to church. I just think I stopped going to church, when I started a PhD program. Mostly because I thought, okay, if I substitute the free time I was spending at church and by keeping the Sabbath, celebrating the Sabbath, by not working and by, just reconnecting to spiritual things and nature, if I stopped doing that and studied instead, then my grades would improve and everything. And that didn't really help. It made me feel better. It made me feel a little bit more confident, but overall it didn't improve anything for my health or my life or my energy levels. I think it actually left me more depleted, in all honesty. And I think that's what led to me, one of the major things that led to me not being able to finish the program was because my health was really suffering then too, and I didn't really notice it, physical and mental health. But that's my own perspective. I can't really say that it was any specific spiritual reason, but I do notice that was probably the first time in my life when I was actually working 7 days a week with no breaks. Didn't, I feel like it's more of a lifestyle balance thing. And I do feel like that for myself, incorporating, Sabbath rest, especially the time of week that it is. I like Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, because it's right at the end of the work week, you just kind of shut down on purpose without fail every week. I like it because I can record podcasts that are kind of about spiritual or religious topics. I like it because I can study kind of more spiritual things. Sometimes I'll get into aliens and extraterrestrial stuff, or kind of new agey kind of stuff like that. But yeah, that's just one of the types of things that I've noticed. So I think that's all I can really say about the Sabbath. I think I've mentioned before, some people don't cook on the Sabbath. Some people don't do chores on the Sabbath. I'm just trying to think, as far as, media, because when I was growing up, people didn't really consume secular media. I don't really think that's the case anymore. I don't know, but I don't think that's the case anymore, where people aren't going on social media at all. Where people aren't, watching YouTube videos that aren't religious at all. I don't really know. It's not part of the culture as far as I know it. I know I grew up with people saying no work or school talk, or not really none, but you're kind of taught to, in a way, kind of have none, not really fully none, but it's none as in, you just don't, go out of your way to talk about that kind of stuff. So, okay, I'm gonna record one more for tonight, but that's all about the Sabbath, I think, for now. All right. Thanks for listening.